All right, here we go. Welcome everybody to the Fancy Thinker, to the short fiction side hustle number 8. We are continuing to make our way through Reave the Just in Other Tales by Stephen Donaldson, and today we will be talking about the fifth story in this book called Penance.
Hmm.
A short novella, really. It's like a good
Mm.
60, 70 pages long. And with me today, I have my bestest of friends. We got Vasha from Reading by the Raining Mountain, and we have Chris from Chronicle of Chris. And thank you very much, guys, for reading this with me and being here. I enjoyed it a lot. Um,
Mm.
and first of all, Chris, let's get some high level thoughts from you about this story.
So this story, I sort of alluded to this a little bit last night when I was about halfway through when we were having a brief discussion about it. It's sort of a hybrid between Dracula and Frankenstein in terms of thematically, and also because it's very gothic in nature. I think the themes that are in both of those novels come to the frontier. Dracula in terms of it literally being about vampires, and then Frankenstein about the idea that this being is not accepted by others around him, and it causes introspection and problems for himself in that case. And it's been not just in terms of style, but it's a bit different in terms of what it's trying to think tell compared to the other stories that we've read in Reave the Just. I sort of feel like it was very much a one person story to kind of tell their tale of sorrow and of woe around it, and it was very effective. Like about halfway through, I was like, "Where's this gonna go, and what's gonna happen?" But it was very satisfying by the end.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with that one. Yeah. And you, Vasha?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it too. I haven't read Dracula, and I didn't think of Frankenstein until Chris mentioned it, but I see it now. But especially the part where the monsters tells its tale, right, and goes around trying to find affection or acceptance in some form and
Mhm.
keeps failing at it. But yeah, I really enjoyed this story, and as a rule, I don't like vampire stories, or at least this is in that category of stories that I feel like I don't like, but then if you give me a good one, I will enjoy it. Like I keep saying that about stories with ships, for instance. Anyway, uh I really enjoyed this one and the themes that it touched upon. And I did think it revisited some of the themes from previous stories, or depending on the order in which these were written, maybe this was one of the first. But the who's the monster aspect of it, that we
Mhm.
was it the killing stroke, where the dark versus light, the dark sorcerers were considered bad by default. And um and it, and it turned out that the light was wreaking more havoc than the dark, right? I might be conflating my wars of light and shadow and killing stroke terminology there, but that was, I think, the essence of that story. But this one felt very similar in that sense too, especially the little speech that Duke Obel, is that his name,
Mhm.
gives about what his issues are with the cardinal, and talks about how he's enforcing uh, the Lord's justice, or whatever it is that he calls it. And he doesn't like the way he goes about it, to the point where people who don't follow the religion are persecuted. So, yeah, these are all, as you guys know from talking to me a lot, like themes that are pretty like close to home for me, and also like the who's the monster aspect of it.
Mm.
um yeah, I always appreciate. So yeah, it was a good story.
Yeah, cool. That's pretty cool. I like that. I like that viewpoint of it. It definitely is a story that harkens back to that gothic style, that 19th century feel of first of all in first person, and which is was quite common back then, but also like you said, that the that who's the monster aspect, but that the monster telling his story, I think was the main thing that that Donaldson was playing with here in this particular novella, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it because it was but it had that feel also in the 19th century of really explaining things, like his feelings, really getting down and gritty with like explaining every little detail of what he was doing, how he was going about it, who he was speaking to, why he was speaking to them, and how he thought they might feel about what he's doing. And that to me was like like reminded me of Jane Eyre. It reminded me of uh of Frankenstein and other stories like that from the 19th century, that with that gothic style of storytelling. And so I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, again, common things that run through an awful lot of stories we go. This idea that people adopt default a taken position because of religion, politics, or otherwise, that kind of is an absolute. And then the stories that we read sort of push at the edges against that again to say who is right and who's wrong. In this case, very much about the idea of religion, of being good versus bad, heaven versus hell, and actually not looking at the quality of man and the quality of life and all of that kind of stuff, rather than just judging people on some pretext or otherwise of the character rather than the man, or the
Yeah.
people, and especially in this case that people can't change and find another way because of a different style of life that they want to, which I think is quite important as well.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Yeah, I like how we start off right off the bat with this concept of um bringing bringing back somebody um to health by giving up your own health. That's like a really strong theme that runs through the story, is giving yourself in order to um, help somebody else out, basically. And I love how that theme gets turned around when he starts telling his history, and I love that that little that classic gothic thread of telling that story within the framework of the story. And we saw that he is willing to do this, to give himself his life force up because somebody else helped him out in the past and showed him a better way, and I thought that's just classic 19th century gothic type literature there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not so much about the taking. It's like an exchange, isn't it? In life that is kind of gathered around him. He could take the life, but he can also help somebody at the final stages of death to go on ahead, and then in return, he can also do it the other way and weaken himself. So it's almost, you know, when we think of vampires, we often think of it very much in a hellscape, in the idea that they are, because they're soulless, they're just pure evil in their own makeup. But in this story, and like the other Donaldson stories that we've read here, he kind of takes that and presents it as you would think, but has a little twist on it as well, because it's very much about he's just another being. This is just how he survives. He feeds on blood. He really has no other choice. And you can look at certainly us and the fact that we are meat eaters and carnivores and all of that kind of stuff. And so in some ways we do similar things, but we judge because it's humanity and all of that kind of stuff. Whereas in this case, it's very much as a philosophical choice for him to be able to say, look, I can sacrifice myself. I will sacrifice myself for causes and people that I believe in. This isn't just about sustenance. This is about me changing who I am as a person. I thought it was quite impactful the longer that story went on.
Mm-hmm.
And right now the only way he can sustain himself is by experiencing nausea with it, right? Which, oh, must be so hard. As someone who really likes to eat, that sounds horrible.
Yeah. Yeah, it's yeah, a key line I think is it's a transaction fraught with pain for him, as well as the with the weakness of deep loss, all compounded by the unannealed visceral terror of giving away my own life. And that's like a key line right there, and it's how it's not just a simple thing. It's not just a simple trade. There's a lot of scary stuff that goes into doing what he does, but he does it anyway. And he really, you know, we got to remember that he's also building up his own character as well, because it is first person. But we have no reason to believe, I think, that he's an unreliable narrator in in the way that we've seen with other narrators who are much more unreliable than this one. Um,
Mm-hmm.
he seems to be a fairly um, honest and straightforward narrator as far as what he's been through. He's honest about himself and his what he's done, and he yeah he doesn't even like damn the people who do him wrong all that much, other than he's working with this duke against the high cardinal who did such wrong to him.
Yeah. And I like that the Duke, when he gave his explanation, it started out sounding like, "Hey, I'm not sharing power," but really, the reason, or at least a part a part of the reason, was that the cardinal wanted to, I don't know if it was forcefully convert or deny them any succor, like the refugees and people who weren't of the faith. um, he wanted to treat them differently or take away rights from them, and the duke wasn't going to allow that. That's why he's waging this war. So it's he's taking a moral stand, not
Mhm.
just fighting for power.
Yeah, you're right. And there's a great yeah, during the duke's speech there, because it was interesting because he was forced to bring Scriven to him, and he made Scriven explain his actions because of all the rumors and stuff, and all there was kind of some political pressure on the duke to bring this forth and bring his servant into the light, which was, of course, a kind of a metaphor, uh, and because vampires aren't supposed to like the light, and this kind of light was just exposure, not actual light. But I like the symbolism there, and but he but Scriven eventually turns it around with the question, "Why do you oppose a high cardinal to the duke?" And I really like that part. Um, and when the duke answers, like you said, Vasha, he's answering for the crime of the cardinal, basically uh, butting into his business, really. And the speech kind of reminded me of, because this is a very medieval setting, and it's like the only magical part of it is the existence of this creature. Basically, there's no other magic. It's very medieval, historical setting type of place. The obviously Mother Church is the church, the Catholic Church at the time, and obviously the Duke is standing for the state. And so the Duke is spelling out the classic church versus state confrontation that was happening in medieval Europe during the Middle Ages. And so I like how Donaldson kind of just played with that and used that as the background of a vampire story.
Right. I had a question about the mother church appellation of the church. Uh, is there a father church, or is that something that Donaldson made up? Or is that mother or father? Is that a prefix that is used in the context of the church at all, ever?
Not usually. That's for certain Christian churches. I mean, it's only Catholicism that really looks at the female side, with Mary being a deity,
Mhm.
of a case. But everything else, I think, is very much considered to be male
Mm.
in a lot of ways. But I think, again, it kind of gives this a fantasy sort of romantic nature in some ways, that it's our world, but not quite our world, which means you
Mm.
can play a little bit.
Yeah.
But to Jared's point, actually, about you being the state, I think you can look at this story as being an allegory for minorities within society, because it's not until the state stands up for minorities and makes a case for the minorities that they could ever be accepted. They can't do it by themselves. And
Mm.
like, for a story just about vampires and all the rest of the decree at the end of this, and the acceptance from the church at the end for the bishops to say, yes, we accept all that and do it, came because the state created both the way for them to prove themselves and also the acceptance of them at longer term, because he thought he was going there to die. He thought he was going to be a martyr in some ways, this vampire, but actually, as it turned out, it was his vindication and his validation that came out of it at the end.
Yeah, that's very good. I like that. Yeah, very cool. All right, and when he says, "I serve you, my lord, because his reverence, Stralish beautified, instructed me to do so." Um, and that was like, I was like, uh, but and I love how the audience jumps up and just starts shouting, like, sacrilege and satanic cunning and madness and all that stuff. And and but of course he was referring to how the cardinal kind of drove him into the duke's arms by the horrible things that was done to his friends.
Yeah, I kind of thought that part was quite risky, because when he said it, it seemed like the story was going to go in a completely different direction, in that he was a spy. Although he deals with that immediately, because people shout, "Oh, are you a spy?" And he says no, and then he goes on to tell a story. But it sort of give the impression that something else was going on in this world. But then we got into the very personal nature of his relationship with the Marathi and
Yeah.
the other priest, etc., which was life affirming in some ways, because they took him for what he was and dealt with their own feelings of how they were brought up and all the rest of them, to deal with him as a person, which I thought was quite interesting. But yet, and again, another kind of religious allegory, they betrayed him at the end to Brelish. It was that kind of Judas thing at the end, and kind of understanding when he was in fearful for his own life and fearful for the life of her, that he had to betray him at the same stage. But again, a lot of these allegories and stories that kind of touch on other touchstones the whole way through it, really, really very clever, as all these stories have been.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Clever indeed. Yes, and yeah, and so he goes through that that process of trying to of wondering. He goes through the same process that basically that Frankenstein monster does, really, where he comes across a family and he's observing, he's trying to find out what it is about them, what makes them tick, why do these people go to the church, why do they um worship in the way that they do. He is assuming he doesn't have a soul because that's what the only thing he's known. He mentions like others of his kind that you know that uh he wonders about. He doesn't know them because they don't stick together, I guess, as a group. They don't come together. They're solitary hunters. And and so when he finally gets in with what's her name, Ariata, when she shows him kindness in the church and isn't immediately repulsed by him, um, then it opens the door for him to start learning more and start seeing things differently. And it was interesting because they they did at first react with a little bit of revulsion when he finally told them exactly what he does. Um, but they were able to overcome that based upon his actions towards them up until that point. And it was the father that told him how to survive, um, without actually taking people's lives, right? If I'm correct.
Yeah, yeah. He
Yeah.
he said, "I will baptize you, but on the condition that um, you don't kill anyone anymore." And
Right.
our person whose name we never find out says, "How do I eat?" Then he says, "You can only take the life of those who've already been claimed by God."
Right. Yeah. Clever insertion by the father there. Um, and but it also served to show that you have good and bad within each sector of society, within the church, within the state, even among his kind. There can be the possibility of good and bad, and that is not you're not just relegated to being good or bad based upon where you're from or who you're associated with.
Yeah, it goes back to that thing I think the Duke was saying about people of God should be open because God is loving and kind. So then uh, the default needs to be that you have to be open to other people, other ideas, and so the father, I forget his name, that Idrina took him to, was very kind in that way. And yeah, completely and it also goes to show that the men in power are often sort of the worst of the bunch, that the representative may not be the what the group as a whole believes in, right? Like the cardinal is seems to be the topmost person on that side of the war, but this father doesn't reflect his beliefs, but he's forced to cave uh, because the other guy is in power.
Yeah. Father Donaldson was his name.
Mm, right, right.
Yeah. Just reinforcing the idea that at the heart of it, we're all sheep.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
People.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if he was called a lot of different names. He was called a ghoul. He was called a vampire. He was called something else.
Carrion Crow.
Carrion crow.
That was the one that was so hurtful.
Yeah.
it yeah, okay, and
But that ghoul appellation is um actually more related to the battlefield scavenger than the lore of vampires was. And so it was interesting how he kind of combined them into one kind of creature in by just by the creature's actions. It kind of combined it in the myths into each other. Um,
mm,
it was the blood that allowed Scriven to be able to heal somebody and be able to get his own power from,
mm,
but it was also the manner of how he went about it on the battlefield that actually lends itself more to the ghoul type of myth. And so I like how Donaldson played with those as well within the
yeah,
context of the story.
yeah. I also I think um this reminds me a little bit of one of Ted Chiang's stories. I forget which, but it's like it's like vampires in conversation with the mythology surrounding them, right? Like that's what this story is, because vampire mythology often comes with throw some holy water at it, it'll disappear. It's like show a cross, and it's basically you're outside, you are soulless and horrible. And typical vampire stories go around like preying on innocent humans, and that's that. But this vampire wants to change his base nature, and he's not given a chance, and won't be if all the religious stuff around, like basically that they are creatures of God, who creatures presumably made by God, who are being rejected by God, right? Like that's the conversation in this story that the vampire is sort of having with its own mythology, which I thought was brilliant.
Yeah, it's cool. It's always neat to get a different, unique take on the whole vampire mythology, and I always suspect it's kind of hard to come up with a new one
Mm,
these days because there's a lot of them.
yeah.
All right, so that was a nice little story. I
It
enjoyed
was.
it, and any final thoughts on Penance from Mr. Donaldson?
No, I've recommend people read it. I definitely think it has layers and depths to it
Mhm.
that make it definitely worth your while. And like I say, especially if you've read sort of Frankenstein, Dracula, and seeing those themes sort of combined into one, I think that was fun for me, definitely to dig into.
All right, agreed. And so next month we will have the story called "The Woman Who Loved Pigs."
Yes, I've been looking forward to that since we
Yeah,
started this book.
Uh, that's a heck of a title,
it certainly is.
The
which
woman who
just
loved pigs.
gives all kinds of ideas. I guess I don't know,
Indeed.
Mhm.
but yeah, this is another little novella, about 60 pages or so. So we'll be reading that for next month, and after that we'll have one more story in the Donaldson collection, and we will be finished with this one.
Oh no.
So I'll have to think about something else to do next,
Mm.
but
Nice.
we'll leave that a mystery for now. Um, until next time, you can find Chris on his channel,
Mhm.
Chronicle of Chris, and you can find Vasher on Reading by the Rainy Mountain. And as I always say, be good to each other, and thank you.